Hi folks, welcome to our video series on evaluating individuals here in the compensation course. And some of the things we're going to talk about here are some of the main reasons for conducting appraisals and why so many of them fail, right? Because not all of us have had positive experiences with performance appraisals. A lot of it depends on how we measure and who measures and how the feedback is given. So we're going to talk a little bit about why some performance system, appraisal system, systems that are out there don't work. We're going to also discuss some of the different methods for appraising performance along with their strengths and weaknesses. We're also going to look at some of the possible sources of performance appraisals. So in other words, who can assess performance? Look at the concept of performance management. So it's not just the appraisal piece, but it's also the management and the follow-up. We're going to talk a little bit about and how to link merit pay to performance appraisals and some design issues in developing effective merit pay systems. So let's begin. So why do we appraise? Well, there's four main reasons: administrative reason, developmental, supervisory, and symbolic. But in any case, no matter what the reason is you're appraising, you're always looking at appraisal as, or this whole concept of appraisal as a process of assessing the overall performance level of your employees. So again, you're trying to provide feedback. You're trying to get your organization in shape. So an appraisal process is necessary in order to do that. How effectively it does it depends on the system. So let's talk about each of the reasons why. When we look at the administrative reason, we're really looking to identify individuals perhaps who are not performing well and who may be dismissed, especially if they've been advised of substandard performance and given an opportunity to improve. Sometimes we want to identify individuals who should be considered for promotion or merit, and just to monitor the overall quality of performance in a company, how well the employees are doing, if there's been improvement, if there's been anybody who's performed much better than they did before. And of course, the legal reason, why we might need to terminate some people. We can also look at developmental reasons. So is there anybody who maybe isn't promotable now, but might be promotable if we could develop them? So the idea is to help the employee understand a little bit more about what the employer's expectations are if they want to be promoted, if they want to enhance their career while they're with a company. But the key here is to provide you feedback that's useful, okay? So that the employee will have an idea of when they've improved, what an improvement looks like, and what a better job looks like. So if you want to help people develop, then certainly they need the feedback as well. So we need an appraisal system. We can also look at the supervisory reason, which is to improve the quality of the a supervisor's ability to give feedback, right? So again, it's not just about making the employee whom you're praising better, but also the supervisor better. They need practice in doing it as well. So sometimes we find in organizations that many supervisors or managers have a hard time starting conversations that they think may be difficult with employees, right? So if that's the case, they need training. And what better way to train than to actually deliver appraisals? And of course, there's a symbolic reason. We want to make sure we do them because we don't want employees to think we don't care, right? So there's always this concept of creating the impression, that we do have a process because it's the right thing to do. So appraisals demonstrate this concern to employees, the concern that you care, right? So, and it should. People do want to feel like how they perform matters, because most people nowadays in work, they want to, in the workplace, they want to make sure that what they do matters to the bottom line of the company. Do they have an impact? Is their job important, right? But performance appraisals will demonstrate this concern as long as people believe that the performance is what the appraisal system truly measures. So in other words, we want to make sure that whatever performance measurement system we use is really measuring what we do, right? And measuring the most important key things of what we do, and also identifying where we can be better. Now, what are some of the pitfalls of performance appraisal? Well, sometimes they're not reliable and valid, and we talked about reliability and validity in relation to other concepts in previous slides. But when do we know a performance appraisal system is reliable? Well, when it produces the same score even when a different appraiser appraises your performance. And sometimes we do have more than one person appraising your performance, right? But if we're appraising the right things, if we've got objective measures in place, then the appraisal, no matter who does it, should come up with the same results in how you performed. Validity means when an employee receives the highest scores in a performance appraisal system that are in fact the highest performers. So the employees who do receive the best scores are in fact your best performers. We don't want employees getting high scores and they're mediocre or average performers, right? So we need to make sure that the process that we use to appraise performance and the process that we use to track performance is really flagging and identifying the people who are top performers. Now, the other side of that is, hey, if people aren't performing, they should also be identified as low-level performing employees, right? So again, a lot of it comes down to metrics, making sure the metrics can't be jimmied with or misconstrued or misapplied or mismeasured, right? So we need to make sure that our performance appraisal process is reliable and valid. Otherwise, it won't have any credibility to the supervisors giving the appraisal, and it won't have any credibility to the employees whose performance is being appraised. Let's look at some of the inaccuracies that happen in a performance appraisal system, and some of them, we refer to these mostly as the unintentional ones. First of all, there's a central tendency error that can happen when all appraisers rate all employees as average in everything, right? Sometimes appraisers, your supervisors, your managers, might not necessarily know the things that they should be monitoring or measuring. So sometimes they don't know how to measure people. So they just say, well, you're pretty good. You're pretty good. Sometimes they don't know what average looks like in comparison to good or somewhat substandard. I mean, how do you identify what average behavior looks like? So sometimes everybody gets identified as average because they don't know any differently, right? We also have this concept of the halo effect. That occurs when an appraiser rates an individual at either high or low on all characteristics because one characteristic is either high or low. So if you perform well in one thing, I'm just going to say you perform well in everything. If you perform poorly in one thing, then you perform poorly in everything. Clearly, you need evidence. There needs to be some evidence in how the employee is performing. But sometimes we do tend to, our own biases step in and we tar everybody with the same brush on everything they do, right? And the recency effect. Sometimes we tend to look at the most recent performance appraisal results and we forget some of the ones that might have happened a month, 2 months, or 6 months ago. So that's why I often say it's really important to appraise people frequently when you see them doing something really well or when you see them doing something that needs improvement, because we may tend to evaluate performance based on what we can remember or what we've recently seen as opposed to what we're really appraising. So if the performance appraisal period is for 6 months or for 3 months, you better remember what happened at the beginning of that 6-month period or the beginning of that 3-month period, or if it's annual, at the beginning of the year, right? It all has to be part of it. But hopefully we've had some corrective action taking place throughout the period so we can also monitor how much people have improved, right? The other thing we have is what we call the contrast effect, or the contrast effect. The contrast effect really looks at evaluating, maybe say, for example, you've evaluated somebody as your top performer, right? So if you've evaluated somebody as your top performer, all right, you might look at everybody else and evaluate them based on whether or not you think they're as good as your top performer. So it's almost like some kind of a comparison that you're making. And again, if somebody performs poorly on a job, then if other people aren't performing as poorly, then they're going to be rated much higher than that poorer performer. So you kind of do everything relative to the highest performer or to the lowest performer in your organization. So I've often thought that might not be a good idea, because I always feel we shouldn't be evaluating or comparing people as to how they perform vis-a-vis others. We should really be evaluating and assessing performance based on the performance standards and objectives that we've set for that individual. We just need to make sure that those objectives and standards that we set can be measured, right? So we shouldn't be comparing people against each other. The similarity effect means that sometimes if you see people who are similar to you in a lot of ways, maybe you like the same hobbies, maybe you have the same reactions to things, maybe you laugh at the same jokes, you shouldn't be saying, well, that's a great guy to me, so I'm going to evaluate him high, So just because they're similar to you, it doesn't mean that they should be rated higher. Or perhaps there might be a negative bias. Gee, if I rate that person high, even though they're a really good employee, they might say, well, I'm playing favoritism because I see them much being like me, so maybe I better rate them low. So either way, you could go to one extreme or the other, but the similarity effect is not something that should enter into your appraisal. The leniency effect means that some people can't have difficult conversations with other people, right? Sometimes we have a hard time telling some really nice folks some not so nice things about their performance. So we tend to be really a little bit lenient and might give them a high performance rating. And the last one here is the harshness effect. Sometimes we're just tough on everybody. We're really hard to please as the boss, right? So sometimes the appraiser is just very, very challenging and very difficult, and rates everybody low. Sometimes we have those people. And I thought there was an interesting one that I didn't put on the slide here, but was interesting because I don't really know a lot about it beyond what's in the book. But I'm sure we've heard of these things before. It's called the beauty effect. The beauty effect is, say you have people who work for you that are excessively good looking or perhaps excessively not so good looking. It seems to be, some of the research is showing that people who are, say, for example, taller than others get promoted more quickly or more often than those who are not as tall. They also see that people who are obese, some of the research is showing that they're also maybe discriminated against in some respects. Sometimes they tend to receive lower performance ratings than they may deserve. So again, the beauty effect is an interesting one. I don't really know a lot about it, to be honest, but you know what? I've always suspected, this is just my view, I've always suspected in the recruitment process, in the selection process, it may have a bearing. I talked to an HR director at one time, and I thought it was very interesting that their organization at one time said that we better not hire people who are obese because, there may be health problems down the road. Well, we all know that there could be some obese people out there with very few medical problems, and some people who are, average, who may have a whole whack of health problems. So, I find some of those things very interesting. And so when you look at the beauty effect, that could be too, that there's a bias toward the way people look. But in any case, I'm just mentioning it here in the video series, but it is in your textbook if you want to read up a little bit more on it. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to cut off our video, and what we'll do is we'll get into methods and instruments for appraising performance in our next video.